$850 billion. That is how much Elon Musk is worth right now. And by the time you watch this, it will probably be more. When you adjust for inflation and compare across all of human history, he is the wealthiest individual who has ever lived. Wealthier than the railroad tycoons of the 1800s, wealthier than the oil barons, wealthier than any king, emperor, or pharaoh in the ancient world. And right now, he is on a direct path to becoming the world's first trillionaire. But depending on who you ask, he either earned every single dollar of it through genius and sacrifice, or he is the most successful con artist in modern history. His supporters say he revolutionized multiple industries and is dragging humanity toward a better future. His critics say he is a narcissistic fraud who built his entire mythology on promises he never kept. And while his companies break records and his net worth climbs higher than anyone in history, protesters march in the streets and his dealerships burn. So the question at the center of all of this is simple. What does it actually mean that one man has accumulated this much wealth and power? Does it represent genuine progress and human ingenuity, or does it represent something far more dangerous? This video is going to give you the full picture of who Elon Musk really is, where he came from, what he actually built, what he promised and never delivered, and what it means for the rest of us that someone like him now sits at the center of the global economy and the American government at the same time. Let us start at the very beginning. Elon Musk was born in Pretoria, South Africa in 1971, but his family did not originate there. They had only moved to South Africa about 20 years before he was born. And the reason for that move is one of the most important and most consistently ignored parts of his entire story. Elon Musk's maternal grandfather was a man named Joshua Norman Haldeman. Haldeman was born in 1902 in Minnesota. His family had originally immigrated to America from Switzerland in the 1700s, and he would go on to live one of the stranger lives you will find in any biography. When he was 3 years old, his father was diagnosed with diabetes, which led his mother to attend chiropractic school in search of a cure. That decision eventually brought the family to Canada, where his mother became the first licensed chiropractor in Canadian history. Haldeman followed in those footsteps and became a prominent chiropractor himself. But before that, he tried farming, lost everything in the Great Depression, worked various odd jobs, and eventually returned to chiropractic, where he became a significant figure in the Canadian chiropractic community. But where Haldeman would really leave his mark was in politics. In the early 1930s, a movement called Technocracy Incorporated began growing rapidly. Their mission was to replace democracy and elected politicians with a system run entirely by engineers and scientists. Within a few years, the organization had attracted nearly 500,000 members across North America, and Haldeman was one of their true believers. Born out of the desperation of the Great Depression, their ultimate vision was to create what they called a technate, a self-sustaining political unit covering the entire American continent from Panama to the North Pole, governed not by votes or politicians, but by the pure logic of engineering and science. Their leader, Howard Scott, once said that politics was the natural approach of morons, and that every political ideology from communism to conservatism all smelled the same. Then the Second World War began, and because Technocracy Incorporated was a massive, growing organization that openly advocated dismantling its own country in the middle of a war, the Canadian government banned it entirely. Just weeks after the ban, Haldeman was arrested by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police for being a member of an illegal organization. It is worth pausing here to understand what this movement really was in context. In the late 1930s, industrial engineering was the cutting-edge technology of the era. Building highways, skyscrapers, factories, weapons, and vehicles was to that generation what software and artificial intelligence are to ours. Technocracy Incorporated was essentially the equivalent of a modern tech CEO standing up and saying society would run better if we just handed control of everything over to Silicon Valley. Even after technocracy faded, Haldeman's political ambitions continued. He founded his own movement, ran for Canadian Parliament multiple times, and at one point advocated drafting every man and woman between the ages of 16 and 60 into military service. And then, in 1950, when his children were barely 2 or 3 years old, he packed up his entire life and moved his family 6,000 miles away to Pretoria, the capital city of South Africa. He left behind one of Canada's largest chiropractic practices, a large home, and even his own private plane. The family's official explanation for this decision was that Haldeman had an adventurous spirit and wanted a better climate to raise his children in. Most books about Elon Musk still repeat this version of events, describing Haldeman as a daredevil adventurer who flew his plane into the African bush looking for lost cities. But Haldeman himself told a very different story. Just 1 year after arriving in South Africa, he wrote an article for a newspaper back in Saskatchewan in which he described Black South Africans as very primitive people who must not be taken seriously. He wrote that the best of them could not assume responsibility and would abuse authority. And he finished by saying that the present government of South Africa knew how to handle what he called the native question. Years later, speaking directly to a right-wing South African publication, he stated plainly that it was not that South Africa's racial policies had kept him away. In fact, those policies were precisely what had drawn him there. Haldeman arrived in 1950, just 2 years after the National Party swept to power in South Africa on a platform of formal racial segregation. That government immediately began passing the laws that would define the country's history for decades. The Population Registration Act classified every citizen by race. The Group Areas Act dictated where non-white people were permitted to live. The Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act banned interracial marriage. This was the country Haldeman had chosen for his family, and he had chosen it deliberately. On March 21, 1960, South African police opened fire on a crowd of unarmed black protesters at a demonstration in Sharpeville. They killed 69 people, many of them shot in the back as they ran away. The United Nations passed its first official condemnation of apartheid shortly after. International outrage began building toward decades of isolation for the South African government. Haldeman's response was to call it a conspiracy. He wrote that the facts of history showed the white man had always developed whatever country he inhabited to the benefit of all. He wrote that black people had discovered nothing, not even the wheel. He described apartheid South Africa as the leading white Christian civilization for all of humanity. For the next 15 years, he produced books and essays claiming that vaccines, fluoridated water, and health insurance were all instruments of a global conspiracy operating in every country on Earth. Elon Musk's own father, Errol Musk, would later go on record stating that Haldeman and his wife were fanatically pro-apartheid and that they used to support Hitler. This information is not hard to find, but it is consistently underplayed or omitted entirely from most major books and documentaries about Elon Musk. The most well-known biography of Musk, by Walter Isaacson, gives Haldeman roughly a page and a half, describes his politics as quirky, and moves on. Haldeman died in the mid-1970s after accidentally flying his plane into a power line. His grandson Elon was 2 years old, too young to have any memory of him. But that does not mean Haldeman's legacy would not follow Elon Musk for the rest of his life. Elon Musk grew up wealthy. His father Errol was the youngest person in South Africa's history to earn a professional engineering degree. And by the time Elon was a child, his real estate development business was thriving. By the time Elon was 8 years old, his family lived in one of the largest houses in Pretoria. His father owned 2 properties, a yacht, a plane, 5 luxury cars, and a truck. Errol Musk would later say that they were so wealthy at certain points that they could not even close their safe. But wealth and stability are not the same thing. Because alongside extraordinary privilege, Elon Musk's childhood was also defined by extraordinary cruelty. His mother May has described her then husband punching her while driving, with 5-year-old Elon standing between the seats, trying to stop it by hitting his father's legs, while the other children cried in the back seat. Their divorce did not become possible until 10 years later because voluntary divorce was not yet legal in South Africa at the time. During the proceedings, Errol was reportedly seen going to friends' homes looking for May with a knife in his hand. When the time came for Elon to choose which parent to live with, he chose to stay with his father because, in his own words, his childish mind thought his father needed company to be happier. He would later describe that decision as a horrible mistake. The violence in his life was not confined to home. At school, a group of boys attacked him from behind, kicked him in the head, and threw him down a staircase. When he hit the bottom, they followed him down and kept beating him. His brother Kimball said he could not recognize Elon's face when it was over. It was so swollen that his eyes were barely visible. Elon was hospitalized for 2 weeks. The damage to his face was severe enough that he was still having corrective surgery on his nose years later. The ringleader of the attack was reportedly sent to juvenile detention. But when Elon came home, his father did not comfort him. He did not ask if he was okay or confront the school. Instead, he screamed at Elon for hours, calling him a worthless idiot who deserved what had happened to him. Kimball Musk would later say that his worst childhood memory was not the sight of his brother's destroyed face at the bottom of those stairs. It was watching his father spend an hour telling a child who could barely see out of his own eyes that he had deserved it. In a 2017 Rolling Stone interview, Musk would describe his father as a terrible human being who constructed carefully thought-out plans of evil. The journalist noted that there were things Musk could not bring himself to say out loud, and that during the interview, he broke down and cried silently. He eventually said, "You have no idea about how bad. Almost every crime you can possibly think of, he has done. Almost every evil thing you can think of, he has done it." He was not exaggerating. Elon Musk remains somewhat of a public figure, appearing periodically in the media to praise Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, claim that the United States is doomed because of what he calls race mixing, and state that no one was truly oppressed during the apartheid era. In 1998, he made headlines after shooting and killing 3 people who were allegedly robbing his home. And most significantly, it was later revealed that Elon Musk fathered multiple children with his own adult stepdaughter, a woman he had known since she was 4 years old and had been married to her mother for decades. A 2025 New York Times investigation found that she had been telling relatives Errol was behaving inappropriately toward her, even before she was school-aged. This is the world Elon Musk was raised in. Extreme wealth and extreme cruelty existing side by side every single day. What we know about his teenage years beyond the violence is that they were marked by a growing obsession with technology. He was not an exceptional student, but he taught himself to code from a book and sold a video game. He programmed to a local computer magazine for $500 while he was in 10th grade. By the late 1980s, South Africa was tearing itself apart. The apartheid regime was entering its final desperate years. The government had enacted mandatory military conscription, requiring all young men to serve 2 years in the military after finishing school. During the final years of apartheid, that meant being deployed into black townships to enforce state-mandated racial violence. There was no option to refuse. You either served or went to prison. In a 2013 interview, Musk explained that he had left South Africa specifically to avoid being conscripted into a military that would have required him to participate in oppressing black people. He said it did not seem like a great use of 2 years of his life, and so at the age of 17, Elon Musk left South Africa permanently. According to Musk, he left with almost nothing and built himself from zero in a country he had never visited before. He has described his upbringing as lower income transitioning to middle income. In various interviews, he has said that he arrived in North America with almost nothing, that he worked his way through college with tens of thousands in student debt, and that he shoveled grain and cleaned boilers for $7 an hour when he first arrived. Parts of that are true. He really did take those jobs when he first got to Canada. He really did arrive with only $3,000 in cash. He really did start with very little in terms of immediate resources. But the idea that his family came from nothing is not true at all. He grew up in what was described as the largest house in his city. His family took vacations to Hong Kong and Europe. His father owned a plane and a yacht. His grandfather was similarly wealthy. And perhaps most importantly, he grew up in a country where systemic legal oppression ensured that the competition he faced for jobs, education, and opportunities was artificially reduced. Every advantage that wealth and race could provide in one of the most racially stratified societies in the world was his from birth. The most honest way to describe where Elon Musk came from is this. He had every material advantage a person could possibly have, combined with almost no emotional stability. He was beaten and belittled throughout his childhood in a home where cruelty was ordinary and control was everything. That combination, unlimited ambition formed in a completely unstable environment, would define everything he ever did. After spending a year working at lumber mills and staying with a distant cousin, Musk went on to become the CEO of Tesla, Inc., was admitted to Queen's University in Ontario. 2 years later, he transferred to the University of Pennsylvania, where he earned 2 degrees in physics and economics. Friends from that period described him as intense to the point of being almost alien. His college roommate said that when Musk became interested in something, he developed a level of obsession that other people simply were not capable of matching. He was accepted to a PhD program in materials science at Stanford University, but he never enrolled. Instead, he stayed in the United States without legal residency or authorization to work, intending to catch a wave that was already rising fast. In the mid to late 1990s, internet adoption in America was exploding. Computer ownership went from 10% of households to 40% in less than a decade. Venture capital firms were throwing millions of dollars at internet companies that had no clear path to profit. The gold rush was real. You could show up in San Francisco, pitch an idea, and walk away with $2 or $3 million just to try and build something. And so Elon Musk was one of thousands of people who showed up hoping to grab a piece of it. The difference was that for him, the stakes were unusually high because at any point during those early years, he could have been arrested, deported, and potentially banned from the country for years. He was an undocumented worker in America, living and working illegally on an expired student visa. He built his first company anyway. It was called Zip2. The concept was simple to the point of being almost embarrassing in retrospect. It was a website that combined the idea of digital maps with local business listings. Essentially an online version of the Yellow Pages combined with basic mapping software. The founding story, as Musk tells it, involves working out of a leaky $200 a month office that he and his brother also lived in, sharing a single computer that ran the website during the day and was repurposed for development at night, walking to the gym to shower, and faking a supercomputer for investors using empty computer cases stacked to look impressive. Eventually, Zip2 attracted a $3 million investment from a venture capital firm. Within 2 years, they had partnered with over 150 newspapers, including the New York Times and the San Francisco Chronicle, positioning themselves as a key part of the newspaper industry's digital response. But Elon Musk would not be there for that success. Just months after the $3 million investment came in, the company's board removed him as CEO. Engineers hired to improve the code he had written described it as so tangled and disorganized that it was faster to rebuild the entire website from scratch than to try to fix what he had done. Former colleagues described him as prone to screaming at executives in open offices, rewriting other people's code without asking, and setting deadlines that were impossible to meet. He would walk the office at 9 at night furious that employees had gone home, unable to understand that people had lives outside the building. One story from this period involves a conversation with an early investor during which Musk insisted, despite the discussion being about realistic business strategy, that Zip2 was going to be the biggest company ever built. When the investor tried to redirect the conversation, Musk doubled down and told him flatly that he was the reincarnation of the spirit of Alexander the Great. In 1999, Compaq acquired Zip2 for $35 million. Musk walked away with approximately $22 million at age 27. The company itself did not survive the collapse of the dot-com bubble a few years later. What the story of Zip2 tells you is not that Elon Musk is a fraud or that he is a genius. What it tells you is that his biggest talent was never the building. It was convincing people that what he had built was bigger than it actually was. With $22 million in hand, most people would have stopped. Most people would have bought a nice house, invested conservatively, and called it a life. Elon Musk took almost every dollar and put it into a new company. He called it X.com, and this time the vision was enormous. He wanted to build a complete financial system on the internet. Banking, savings, investments, insurance, mortgages, all under one platform. The idea of a startup doing all of this simultaneously, operating entirely online, was unheard of at the time. Right next door to the X.com office in Palo Alto was a company called PayPal, founded by Stanford graduate Peter Thiel and 2 partners. PayPal had solved a genuinely difficult problem by creating a way for people to send money across the internet, safely using nothing but an email address. This transformed online shopping overnight by eliminating the need to mail physical checks for purchases, rather than compete until one company wins. Failed, the 2 companies merged. Musk became CEO as the largest shareholder. Peter Thiel became chairman. Their growth was extraordinary. On the day of the merger, they had 12,000 users combined. After securing a deal to become the default payment method on eBay, they reached 2 million users within 6 months. But success in terms of users did not mean success as a business. The dot-com bubble had burst. Raising fresh capital had become nearly impossible, and fraud was eating them alive, costing the company $12 million a month to manage. The company was weeks away from bankruptcy, and by every account from people working there at the time, the biggest problem was not the recession or the fraud. It was the CEO. When Musk disagreed with engineers on technical decisions, he challenged them to arm wrestling matches. When the team tried to introduce basic security measures to stop the fraud bleeding them dry, he argued they were not worth implementing. He refused to accept the name PayPal, which was what users already knew and trusted, insisting on keeping X.com as the brand because he was attached to it. While the team was fighting to stay alive, he kept pushing to expand the platform into a full-service banking ecosystem before the company had made a single dollar of profit. He could not get through a meeting without making an enemy. He put everything on the line every time and then alienated the exact people he needed to execute. In September of 2000, while Musk was on his honeymoon in Australia, his team coordinated a board vote while he was still on the plane. He was removed as CEO unanimously and replaced by Peter Thiel, who agreed that Musk was too volatile and uncontrollable to lead the company. For the second time in his career, Elon Musk had been fired from a company he helped create. 3 months later, attempting a second honeymoon after the first was cut short by his ouster from PayPal, he contracted a severe strain of malaria that nearly killed him. According to the story, while lying in a hospital bed being told he was 24 hours away from being unrecoverable, he took out a $100 million life insurance policy on himself with PayPal listed as the beneficiary, so that if he died, the company would not go bankrupt with him. Then in the spring of 2002, his and his wife Justine's firstborn son died of sudden infant death syndrome at 10 weeks old. And then a few months after that, PayPal was acquired by eBay. Musk had held onto his 12% stake through all of it. His payout was more than $175 million. Max Levchin, a PayPal co-founder, would later say that one of Musk's greatest skills was his ability to present his vision as a mandate from heaven. Max was also one of the people who voted to remove him from PayPal. And that tension, the genuine visionary capacity existing alongside the inability to function with other human beings, that is the core contradiction at the center of everything that would follow. Elon Musk at 30 years old could tolerate extreme risk far beyond what most people could stomach. He would risk deportation to make $10 million and then risk the $10 million to make $100 million. But the traits that drove that ambition do not switch off when you walk out of the office. The same need for total control, the same inability to accept criticism, the same willingness to burn everything rather than let anyone else be right, those showed up everywhere. After losing a child, being fired twice, nearly dying of malaria, and going through a divorce, all before the age of 31, Elon Musk did what he always does. He took almost everything he had and poured it into not one but two new companies. The first was SpaceX. The story goes that Musk one day searched NASA website for a mission to Mars and found nothing. Within months, he had put $100 million into founding a private rocket company with the stated goal of making humanity a multiplanetary species. The second was Tesla. In 2003, two engineers named Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning had noticed that battery technology had progressed to the point where a viable electric car might finally be possible. They founded Tesla and began raising money. In 2004, Elon Musk put in $6.5 million, representing about 85% of the entire first funding round, becoming the company's largest shareholder and chairman. The early years of both companies were, by every available account, a complete disaster. SpaceX's first rocket launch lasted 41 seconds before catching fire and crashing into an ocean reef. Two subsequent launches reached impressive altitudes but still failed to achieve orbit. Each failure cost hundreds of millions of dollars. The team described the atmosphere after the third failure as hanging thick with despair. Tesla was doing even worse. By 2008, they had brought a car to market, the Roadster, which became the first highway-legal all-electric production car ever built. But making it had been so plagued by problems that it cost the company $120,000 to produce each one, while they were selling for under $80,000. Every sale was a guaranteed loss. Engineers from both companies at the time said there was probably a 90% chance of both companies failing entirely, and that the vision of sustainable transportation and private space travel would likely die with them. By the end of 2008, both companies had completely run out of money. They were weeks from closing their doors permanently. Then, on December 23, 2008, NASA called to award SpaceX a $1.6 billion contract for resupply missions to the International Space Station. It was their first real revenue, arriving days before they would have been forced to shut down. The following day on Christmas Eve, Tesla closed an emergency funding round, with money arriving just hours before they would have had to cease operations. They had been pulled back from the absolute edge of total collapse by government funding and private investors. It is easy to frame this as a story of Elon Musk's personal sacrifice and willingness to risk everything he had for a vision bigger than himself. He really did spend down to his last dollar to keep these companies alive. That part is true. But the people who worked under him made sacrifices that were in many ways greater than his. SpaceX workers spent months isolated on a tiny chain of islands in the Pacific Ocean, living in the factory for 80 hours a week, thousands of miles from home, watching their work fail over and over again. Reuters would later document more than 600 unreported workplace injuries at SpaceX, including crushed limbs, amputations, electrocutions, and head wounds. A former Marine named Lonnie LeBlanc died on site after being blown off a trailer by the wind. At Tesla, over 100 ambulances were called to their factories in just a few years. Management had been deliberately keeping injuries off the books. A physician's assistant who worked there would later say her instructions were to prevent as many workplace injuries as possible from being officially recorded. In 2019, Tesla would be named one of the most dangerous places to work in America by the National Council for Occupational Safety. Tesla was also never originally Elon Musk's company. He funded it and became its chairman, but he did not found it. Martin Eberhard served as CEO, while Mark Tarpenning worked as vice president of engineering. Musk was actively involved in product decisions, but not in day-to-day operations. Within a few years, Eberhard had been pushed out entirely. Tarpenning followed 6 months later. And then Elon Musk filed a lawsuit and paid a settlement to be legally recognized as a co-founder of Tesla. Not just CEO. Not just majority investor. He wanted the right to call himself one of the people who created it. 20 years later, he still attacks Eberhard online. When Tesla released the Model S in 2012 as their first mass-market sedan, the reception was unlike anything the car industry had seen in decades. Motor Trend named it their car of the year, the first time an electric vehicle had ever won unanimously. Consumer Reports gave it the highest score they had ever awarded any car. Time magazine named it the greatest invention of the year. It was fast, beautiful, efficient, and it worked. Then came the Model X in 2014, an SUV with distinctive vertical falcon wing doors that became an instant cultural icon. Tesla never ran advertisements. They never needed to. Their waiting lists were months long. Celebrities bought them unprompted. Driving a Tesla became shorthand for being wealthy, forward-thinking, and on the right side of history. And at the center of all of it was Elon Musk himself, who by the mid-2000s had become arguably the most beloved entrepreneur on the planet. Back in 2008, while Steve Jobs was releasing the iPhone and Jeff Bezos was building Amazon into a global empire, Elon Musk was essentially nobody. He was not yet a billionaire. He was not famous. That changed when the creative team at Marvel, while developing the character of Tony Stark for the Iron Man films, toured Musk's factory and ended up basing Robert Downey Jr.'s portrayal partially on him. From that moment, his public profile accelerated faster than it ever had before. He became the real-life Tony Stark. Richard Branson described him as humanity's escort to the future. Fortune named him Business Person of the Year. Time wrote that whatever skeptics had said could not be done, Musk went out and made real. The Washington Post called him arguably the world's most important entrepreneur. Every major publication was competing to see who could offer him the most praise. And online, something even more powerful happened. Musk became the first tech entrepreneur who was genuinely funny, genuinely weird, and genuinely seemed to believe in what he was doing. Stories about how he never slept and worked through the night and lived entirely for his mission of saving humanity circulated everywhere. He was not a boring corporate executive. He was a personality, and for millions of people, particularly young people, he represented the future. By 2016, Tesla had announced the Model 3, a significantly more affordable car that would go on to become one of the most popular vehicles in the country. That same year, Musk launched Starlink, a global satellite internet project. He co-founded Neuralink to develop brain implants that could help disabled people interface with computers. He introduced the Boring Company to revolutionize underground transportation. SpaceX announced a Mars mission target of 2022. Every few months, there was a new company, a new frontier, a new reason to believe that Elon Musk was going to change the world, whether it was ready or not. In 2017, author Neil Strauss spent 9 months profiling Musk for Rolling Stone. When he was finished, he described Musk as the single most important person alive, a man who was not trying to build a business, but to make the entire universe safer and better. The entire world believed in Elon Musk. And then in a single moment, everything started to crack. On June 23, 2018, 12 boys and their coach got trapped in a flooded cave in northern Thailand. For 9 days, the world did not know if they were alive. When 2 British cave divers found them huddled on a rocky ledge in total darkness, relief spread globally. The challenge now was getting them out. Elon Musk announced he would build a miniature submarine from parts of a SpaceX rocket to rescue the boys. He mobilized a team of engineers. He flew to Thailand to save the day. By the time he arrived, Thai Navy SEAL had already devised and begun executing a different plan, sedating each child with ketamine and physically guiding their unconscious bodies through the flooded tunnels one at a time. It was terrifying and dangerous. It also worked perfectly. All 13 people were rescued safely. One of the lead divers, a British man named Vernon Unsworth, commented to a reporter that Musk's submarine had no realistic chance of working in that cave system. He called it a PR stunt. Musk responded on Twitter by calling Unsworth, without any evidence, a pedophile. A few weeks later, he doubled down, telling a journalist that Unsworth was literally a child abuser and that he had investigators looking into his background. Unsworth sued Musk for defamation. This was the first moment where the story cracked open. Not because one insulting tweet could erase everything Musk had built, but because it revealed something the hero narrative had kept hidden. Underneath all the talk of saving humanity was a man who simply could not handle being criticized. The Elon Musk that the world had fallen in love with would never have done this. But the Elon Musk that his ex-wife, his former co-founders, and his employees had known for decades, that was an entirely different story. 3 weeks after the cave diver tweet, Musk sent a post saying he was considering taking Tesla private, which caused the company's market capitalization to jump by $8 billion in 4 hours. There was one significant problem: it was not true. He was manipulating the stock price with a social media post. The Securities and Exchange Commission charged him with securities fraud. He settled for $40 million, was forced to resign as Tesla's chairman, and the company was ordered to hire a lawyer to review his posts before publication. A few weeks after that, he appeared on Joe Rogan's podcast and smoked marijuana on camera. Tesla's stock dropped nearly 20% the following day. 3 senior executives resigned immediately, and then it kept going. He threatened employees that if they voted to unionize, he would strip their stock options. A federal judge later ruled that statement illegal. When the COVID pandemic arrived, he publicly dismissed it as overblown, predicted it would essentially disappear within weeks, and described lockdown orders as fascist. By month 2 of the lockdowns, he reopened Tesla factories and fired workers who did not want to return. Hundreds of employees got sick. The public reaction at the time was confusion. Something seemed to be wrong with Elon Musk. He had changed. He was behaving erratically. People wondered what had happened to him. But as we have seen throughout this story, nothing had changed. The version of Elon Musk that was screaming at employees at 9 at night at Zip2, that was the same person who was getting removed from PayPal while on his honeymoon. That was the same person who was pushing Tesla's founders out of their own company. That person had always been there. The mythology had simply made him too large to criticize for too long. And then came the financial revelation that changed everything. A ProPublica investigation published in 2021 revealed that Elon Musk had paid $0 in federal income tax in 2018, a year in which his personal wealth had grown by $15 billion. Averaged across 5 years, he was paying roughly 3% in income taxes. Overnight, Musk transformed from a symbol of the future into a symbol of everything progressives pointed to when they talked about inequality and billionaire excess. From that point forward, every time a politician went on television to talk about the gap between the wealthy and everyone else, they would say, "We're all in this together." Elon Musk's face was the one they put on the screen. The online communities that had worshipped him began to fracture. The press that had competed to praise him began competing to investigate him. Factory injuries, labor violations, broken product promises, tax avoidance, government subsidies, personal relationships. Everything that had been quietly set aside during the years of adoration came flooding back. And Elon Musk's response to losing control of his public narrative was to go in exactly the wrong direction. Around 2020, his online presence transformed completely. He began ranting about George Soros and the so-called woke mind virus, calling progressive politics an extinction-level threat to humanity. His posts shifted to a constant stream of right-wing conspiracy theories and culture war content. Dozens of posts every day attacking liberal politicians and amplifying the most extreme voices in online political discourse. This was the same man who had voted for Obama twice, donated to Hillary Clinton, publicly endorsed Biden in 2020, and built his entire fortune on electric vehicles and clean energy, 2 things that had always been associated with progressive values. The shift was jarring to anyone paying attention. In 2020, his then 16-year-old child came out as transgender. 2 years later, she filed in court to change her name, dropping Musk entirely. The The filing included one line, stating that she no longer lived with or wished to be related to her biological father in any way, shape, or form. Musk responded by going on Jordan Peterson's podcast and saying his son had been killed by the woke mind virus. Nothing he had done up to that point was as immediately repulsive to the general public as that. By early 2021, the mythology was dead. The story of Elon Musk as the selfless genius engineering humanity's future had collapsed. And so he did what people in his position tend to do when they lose control of their narrative. He bought the media. In April of 2022, Elon Musk made an unsolicited offer to purchase Twitter, one of the most influential social media platforms in the world, for $44 billion. The company was not for sale. It was publicly traded. But Musk had been secretly accumulating a 10% stake for months without disclosure before making his offer at nearly 20% above market value. 5 months later, carrying a sink through the front doors of Twitter's headquarters as a joke for the cameras, he became the company's sole owner. He fired the CEO, CFO, head of legal, and head of safety on his first day. Within weeks, 80% of the company's workforce had been eliminated. Employees who remained described sleeping in the office, being expected to work through the night, and watching colleagues disappear without explanation. One engineer described the atmosphere as a never-ending hostage situation where you were expected to feel grateful to the kidnapper. By 2023, 70% of Twitter's advertisers had pulled out. Revenue had fallen to an unsustainable level. The platform that Musk had described as a free speech forum had become something else entirely. A feed dominated by algorithmic amplification of the most extreme and inflammatory content available, AI-generated misinformation, engagement farming, cryptocurrency scams, and political radicalization operating without meaningful restriction. Twitter had been one of the first places where the cracks in Musk's story became visible to the public, where his broken promises on self-driving, his false timelines for Mars, his labor violations, first came under serious scrutiny. Twitter was the primary platform where it happened, and Elon Musk bought it and dismantled it. That alone should be enough of a story. But for Elon Musk, it never ends at enough. In July 2024, Donald Trump was shot at a campaign rally in Pennsylvania. Within minutes, Musk posted his full endorsement of Trump on X. What followed would become the most significant private financial intervention in any American election in history. Over the course of the 2024 presidential campaign, Musk spent approximately $290 million supporting Donald Trump's election, more than either the Republican or Democrat national committees spent on their own candidates. Most of that money went through a super PAC he founded called America PAC, took over the Trump campaign's ground operation in swing states, running door-knocking and voter registration drives. He also funded a political action committee that spent $30 million on advertisements implying, without any basis, that Ruth Bader Ginsburg would have agreed with Trump on abortion policy. He used X to manipulate the platform's recommendation algorithm to amplify his own pro-Trump posts to an audience of hundreds of millions of people. A month before the election, he announced he would pay $1 million per day to registered voters in swing states. The Department of Justice sent a warning letter stating the practice was likely illegal. It continued anyway. In exchange for $290 million and the most influential private media platform in the country, Elon Musk received a seat inside the White House with more unelected authority over the federal government than any private citizen has ever held in American history. Trump had promised Musk his own government department, which they called the Department of Government Efficiency. Its stated mission was to audit federal agencies and eliminate wasteful spending. Musk claimed their team would identify and cut $3 to $4 trillion from the federal budget. On their first day, Musk claimed they had found 20 million Americans over the age of 100 still receiving Social Security checks, implying massive fraud in the system. The actual number, when investigated, was approximately 32,000. From there, the department laid off 1,400 of the 1,700 employees at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the agency that prevents banks from defrauding their customers. They fired half the staff of the IRS division responsible for auditing billionaires. The Yale Budget Lab estimated this decision alone would cost $2.4 trillion in lost tax revenue over the next decade, more than the total amount they were claiming to save. They offered the entire 2 million-person federal workforce the option to resign for a few months of severance pay. Tens of thousands took it. At the same time all of this was happening, Musk was using his government access to benefit his own companies. President Trump was photographed on the White House lawn with Tesla vehicles for the cameras. A Senate investigation found that Musk's companies were facing up to $2 billion in various enforcement actions and regulatory liabilities at agencies across the government. Once Musk was installed at Doge, nearly all of those enforcement actions quietly disappeared. The man who had been handed control of the government to cut waste was using that control to eliminate the government's ability to hold his companies accountable. And then they dismantled USAID. For decades, the United States Agency for International Development had been the largest single provider of foreign humanitarian assistance in the world, responsible for roughly 40% of all global aid. From H1N1 treatment to malaria prevention to disaster relief, the agency had, by its own accounting, saved 26 million lives since 2003. Musk shut it down entirely. All 10,000 employees were fired. Every program was canceled. Aid workers in the field described IV drips being physically pulled from patients' arms the moment the stop work orders came through. HIV clinics in South Africa shut down overnight. A $90 million malaria prevention contract serving 53 million people was terminated with no replacement. Beyond the human cost, USA-1D had always been one of America's most powerful geopolitical tools. When the United States builds a hospital in sub-Saharan Africa, or provides food after a disaster, or funds disease prevention across Southeast Asia, people remember who showed up. That kind of influence, showing up when it counts, was central to America's global standing after World War II. It was what allowed the country to project power and build alliances without military force. And Elon Musk got rid of it to save money, publicly describing the agency as doing nothing but handing out malaria vaccines and funding ideological programs abroad. The backlash against Musk and his companies was unlike anything he had ever experienced. A Yahoo News poll at the height of the Doge controversy found that 67% of Americans said they would never consider buying a Tesla, with nearly half citing Musk personally as the reason. Tesla's profits by mid-2025 had fallen 71%. Sales in Germany and France were each down 60%. A Chinese automaker called BYD passed Tesla as the world's best-selling electric vehicle manufacturer. A brand survey found Tesla ranked as the 95th least favorable of the top 100 American companies. Protests and sit-ins began appearing outside Tesla showrooms across the country. Then vandalism, then fires. Tesla dealerships were targeted with destruction in 12 different states. Tesla's stock fell 50%. Which also cut Elon Musk's net worth in half. By the time Musk's term as a special government employee expired, his companies were collectively worth $800 billion less than when he had first walked into the White House. He had thrown away America's global reputation. He had destroyed tens of thousands of jobs. He had ended programs that had saved millions of lives. And even his own companies were suffering for it. And then, just as this was all unfolding, the situation with Donald Trump collapsed entirely. As the Trump administration advanced what they were calling the Big Beautiful Bill, a sweeping tax and spending legislation estimated to add $4 trillion to the federal deficit over 10 years, Musk began publicly attacking it as an abomination. He posted repeatedly calling for the bill to be killed, framing his opposition as principled concern about deficit spending. But there was a financial reality underneath that framing. The bill included the early cancellation of the $7,000 federal tax credit for electric vehicle purchases, a program that had been scheduled to run until 2034 and had driven millions of Tesla sales. Beyond just consumer tax credits, the bill would also eliminate a system of fuel efficiency credit trading that had generated $3 billion in pure revenue for Tesla in a single year, representing 16% of the company's gross profit. Essentially, the government had been paying Tesla $3 billion a year simply for making electric vehicles, and Tesla had been selling those credits to traditional automakers to help them avoid regulatory penalties. The Big Beautiful Bill was going to end all of it. Trump publicly stated that Musk's opposition to the bill was entirely self-interested, that he was not standing up for American taxpayers, but for his own bottom line. The feud escalated rapidly. Trump called Musk a massive drug addict and threatened severe consequences if he began funding Democrats. Musk attacked the bill as political suicide for the Republican Party. Trump threatened to deport him. And then on June 3rd, Musk posted what he described as the really big bomb. He wrote publicly that Donald Trump was in the Epstein files, and that this was the real reason the files had not been fully released. This was deeply ironic for a specific reason. For years, Elon Musk had positioned himself as one of the loudest voices calling for full transparency on the Jeffrey Epstein case. Going back to 2019, he had publicly called Epstein a creep, demanded accountability, offered to fund lawsuits by victims, and attacked other wealthy figures named in the files, including his former colleague, Reid Hoffman. He was a major reason the conversation about Epstein stayed alive in public discourse. He consistently presented himself as someone who had refused any connection to Epstein. In 2025, he had posted that Epstein had tried relentlessly to get him to visit his island and that he had always refused. Then the Department of Justice began releasing the actual files. Musk's name appeared in the documents thousands of times. Many of those appearances were emails directly to or from Musk himself. On Christmas Day in 2012, Musk emailed Epstein asking whether there were any parties planned and saying he needed to let loose after working to the edge of sanity. A 2015 photograph shows Musk at a dinner table with Mark Zuckerberg, Peter Thiel, and Epstein. Separate emails show Musk asking what day would be the wildest party on the island, and Epstein inviting Musk to come party with women described as cute and under 25. All of this communication was occurring years after Epstein had publicly pleaded guilty to soliciting sex from a minor and registered as a sex offender. Then, there is the matter of Musk's brother Kimball. The files show that Jeffrey Epstein maintained a close and ongoing relationship with Kimball Musk over multiple years, including arranging for a woman he was connected to visit Kimball in Colorado repeatedly. Epstein's emails document him personally controlling this woman's travel itinerary and directing when and where she could visit. Kimball Musk is, by the contents of these files, confirmed to have been receiving visits from a woman under Epstein's control. The Denver Post later reported that the woman Epstein sent to visit Kimball Musk was the same person who described being groomed and trafficked as a minor by Epstein in a 2019 lawsuit. None of this constitutes legal proof that Elon Musk was involved in any criminal conduct. That needs to be stated clearly. But what it does prove beyond any reasonable doubt is that Elon Musk lied. He lied about having always refused Epstein's invitations. He lied about the nature of their relationship. He lied to an audience of hundreds of millions of people on a platform he personally owns and controls. And that hypocrisy, the gap between who he presented himself to be and who the evidence shows him to actually be, extends far beyond Epstein. Elon Musk arrived in America as an undocumented immigrant, working illegally on an expired student visa. If the government had caught him at any point during the founding of Zip2, he would have been deported and potentially barred from re-entering the country for years. Every company he built, every dollar he made, every rocket he launched, all of it exists because the government chose not to enforce the immigration law he was violating. And that same man now runs the most influential platform in the world, which he uses partly to post about immigrant populations threatening America's cultural identity. His companies have received over $50 billion in government contracts, loans, subsidies, and tax credits over the course of his career. SpaceX only survived because NASA handed them $1 billion contract when they were 2 weeks from bankruptcy. Tesla survived the 2008 financial crisis because the Department of Energy gave them a $500 million loan. The electric vehicle tax credits that made Teslas affordable enough for ordinary people. People to buy were funded by the same government Musk spent 2025 trying to dismantle. Starlink has been built substantially on military and government contracts. Every single company in Elon Musk's portfolio was either saved or built in large part by public funding. When critics call him the largest single welfare recipient in American history, that is not hyperbole, it is accurate. And his story of being a self-made man is not just incomplete, it is a fabrication. He did not come from nothing. He grew up in one of the largest houses in his city in a country where his race gave him every legal and systemic advantage available. He worked illegally in America and was never stopped. He built companies that were rescued by government money and used that foundation to tell a story about rugged individual. Genius that was always more mythology than reality. But this is the world we are living in now. 15 years ago, political scientists Jeffrey Winters and Benjamin Page published research asking whether the United States had become an oligarchy. Their conclusion was that oligarchy does not require billionaires to control every single aspect of public life. It just requires that the wealthiest citizens have a unique and concentrated form of power whose primary purpose is to protect and grow their wealth. They do not need to win elections. They just need to ensure that policies threatening their money never become law, and that policies growing their money always do. That paper was written 15 years ago. Today, Elon Musk owns Tesla, SpaceX, and X. Jeff Bezos owns Amazon and The Washington Post. Mark Zuckerberg owns Meta, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. Larry Ellison controls Oracle and TikTok. Peter Thiel, who owns the largest private surveillance company in the world, funded the political campaigns that made J.D. Vance the Vice President of the United States. The billionaires have already won. We are living in their world. Even as Musk's reputation collapses in real time, his net worth continues to climb. He is still on track to become the world's first trillionaire. Even as his favorability numbers hit historic lows, the systems that made him wealthy continue generating more wealth for him automatically. I want to be honest about something. I do not make this video from the position that building companies is wrong, or that making money is wrong, or even that Elon Musk has never contributed anything to the world. Tesla made electric cars viable. SpaceX proved that private companies could build and launch rockets. Those things are real. But there is a threshold where wealth stops being a reward for creating something useful and starts becoming a form of raw power. And I believe we crossed that threshold a long time ago. Democracy is supposed to mean that power comes from people and from votes. But when one man can spend $290 million on an election, when he owns the platform where political discourse happens, when he is then appointed to run a government department with no oversight and no accountability, what are votes actually worth? What does an election mean when one person's financial resources outweigh the collective will of millions of people? And Elon Musk at this point is not even operating within the logic of capitalism. Capitalism means you build something, you sell it, and you compete. What Musk has built is something different. You build a product, use the profits to buy the media, use the media to buy the election, use the election to buy the government, and use the government to eliminate the regulations on your product. That is not capitalism. That is something we do not yet have a clean name for, but that history will recognize clearly. If you go all the way back, past the companies and the billions and the rockets, you find a child growing up in one of the largest houses in Pretoria with a father who beat his wife in front of his kids and told his hospitalized son that he deserved what had been done to him. You find a grandfather who moved his family to South Africa, specifically because the government there was willing to enforce racial hierarchy by law. You find a person who grew up understanding the world as a place where power belongs to whoever is most willing to dominate, and where cruelty is not a failure of character, but a demonstration of strength. Elon Musk's mother once told a biographer that the greatest danger for Elon was always that he might become his father. Looking at everything we have covered, it is difficult to argue that he did not. He is probably very intelligent. He probably works very hard. He has taken credit for work that others did. He has made promises he knew he would not keep. He has helped move some important technologies forward while simultaneously causing real, measurable harm to real people at every stage of that journey. And the same drive that pushed him toward his achievements is inseparable from everything that has gone wrong. Growing up in a violent environment is not an excuse for becoming a person who uses violence and control as default tools. Many people have experienced darkness and found a way not to replicate it. The difference between those people and Elon Musk is not intelligence or ambition or work ethic. It is knowing when to stop. We may be living in Elon Musk's world right now, but this is not a permanent condition. And until it changes, the most important thing any of us can do is be honest about what we are actually looking at, keep saying it clearly, and refuse to be talked out of believing that the weight of right and wrong matters more than the size of someone's bank account. Thank you for watching.